I moved into the house in late October. It was one of those old, crooked places on the edge of town, the kind you drive past and say, one day, maybe. I needed cheap rent and a quiet place to write, so the house fit. 2 floors, a sagging porch, paint peeling like an old scab. The landlord handed me the keys and warned me not to go into the attic. He laughed, the kind of laugh that's half joke, half warning, and said, "No one goes up there anymore." I told him I'd only be staying a few months. He shrugged and left. The first night I unpacked in the kitchen, and everything was normal. The house smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and damp wood. I put a lamp by the bed and opened my laptop. At around 2 in the morning, I woke thinking someone was whispering my name. It was so soft I thought it might be the wind under the door or the heater clicking. I told myself I was tired and fell back asleep. Over the next week, the whispering came more often. Not always at night, sometimes I'd be making coffee and I'd hear it, like a human voice carried through a long hall. It was never loud. Whenever I tried to follow it, it stopped. When I asked neighbors, they said the house had been empty for a long time before I moved in. No one ever went into the attic, they said. The landlord had said the same thing. One night, about 10 days after I moved in, I was up late writing. The rain was steady, and the streetlight outside made the curtains move like slow breathing. At about 1:45, the whisper came from the upstairs hallway, my name, quiet as moth wings. Only this time it sounded closer, like someone right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, and it stopped. I got up and cracked the door. The hallway was empty. The house felt colder upstairs. I walked to the stairs, and the air softened. I remember thinking it felt wrong, like the sound of a TV coming from the next room when there is no TV. On the second landing, there was a narrow door I hadn't noticed before. It was plain, painted the same dull white as the rest of the trim. There was no knob, only a rusted latch. For the next few nights, the whispering got bolder. It would say my name and then nothing. Sometimes it would say, "Come." I started leaving the hallway light on, but it didn't matter. The sound avoided the light like oil on water. I tried recording it with my phone, but every time I played it back, the clip was blank, just static. I asked my friend Sam to come over and listen. He stayed for 1 hour and said he heard nothing. I didn't tell him what I'd heard before, I couldn't make it sound real. On the 12th night, the whisper followed me into the hallway and stopped at the attic door. The attic door was above the landing, a rope hung from its center. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. The whisper curled around the edges of the door and said, very clearly, "Open." I told myself no. I told myself noises in old houses are nothing. But the name, the way it said my name, had a familiarity that squeezed the back of my skull. I climbed the ladder and put my hand on the rope. I almost didn't pull it. But I did. The attic door fell open slowly. Cold air pushed past my face and smelled like dust and something else, sweetness rotten under sugar. There was a ladder that led up into a shallow space. I climbed. The attic was small, not like the huge attics in movies, just a cramped crawlspace with low rafters and splinters. The light from my phone made the space look worse, showing boxes and old furniture and a trunk that had been smacked half open ages ago. There, in the center of the attic, sat a wooden chair. It was an old child's chair, low to the ground, paint flaking off in pale green. On the chair, carved into the back, was my name. It was my name in barely their letters, gouged and weathered, the way a kid would carve in a secret place. Somehow, impossibly, someone had carved it with an old knife. I didn't know how long my name had been there. It looked like it had been there a long time. I touched it. The wood was cold and dry. Then I heard the whisper again, but this time it wasn't a ghost voice, it was the creaking of the house. The attic seemed to fold in on itself. I felt like I was being looked at. Behind the chair, someone had left a small, folded piece of paper. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it. There were 2 lines, written in a child's careful hand. You sleep. I keep watch. Below, in the same hand, there was a date. Not the old faded kind of date, but one that looked fresh. It was yesterday. I brought the paper downstairs and tried to think of a reasonable explanation. Maybe the landlord had left it as a prank. Maybe some kid had snuck in. I told myself these things and still I felt like a bug under glass, visible, but helpless. The next night changed everything. The whispering wasn't only at night. I woke at noon once to find the house quiet but the front door unlocked. Chairs moved. My toothbrush was in the living room. I started setting a camera in my bedroom, a cheap motion sensor cam I got when I worked nights in a supermarket months ago. It ran on batteries, and I had it pointed at my bed. If something was moving at night, I wanted proof. The camera caught hours of nothing, dark frames with tiny flecks from the dust. One clip, at 3:13 in the morning, showed my room lit by the street lamp outside, the light moving as a passing car went by. The moment my bedroom door opened, the clip started to stutter. A thin shadow moved across the doorway, a shape too small to be a grown person. For a second, the motion detector registered movement on the bed, the blankets shifting, and then the frame went to static. On my phone, the footage was saved as a file labeled with a time and the day. I played it back over and over. The shadow was just a darker slit, but at the edge of the frame, in the darkness behind it, another shadow stood too still. It had the shape of a small body. I widened the clip. When I moved the brightness, I could see a pale outline pressed against the wall at the end of the bed. It looked like a face with too much light behind it, sunburned eyes, like paper cutouts. It turned its head. The camera jarred and the clip ended. After that, I stopped sleeping. I started staying up until early morning, watching the house like it would tell me what to do next. The whispering changed tone. It began to call me by a nickname I hadn't heard since I was a kid. If you had asked me, I couldn't have said where the nickname came from. It was something my grandmother had used to call me once. It pulled at a thread of memory I hadn't seen in years, summer floors slick with spilled juice, an old swing, the smell of a neighbor's pie. One afternoon, I went through the trunk in the attic. Inside were notebooks and toys and old photos. There were photos of the house decades before, kids on the porch, a woman smiling with her hair pinned back. There were also tiny pictures of other people sleeping in the rooms, photographs taken from the ceiling, like old Polaroids slapped on a board. I flipped through, and my stomach turned. In every photograph, the person looked peaceful. They were photographed from above, their faces calm, almost too calm. On top of the pile was a photograph of me. It was a photo of me asleep in this very house. It was taken from above, like every other photo. The date on the back was next week. I sat down on the attic floor and let the photograph fall from my hand. It fluttered to the wood and lay face up, staring at me like an accusation. I left the house the next day and slept at Sam's place. He tried to joke about it, saying it was probably the landlord or someone pranking me. He came with me to confront the landlord, but when we drove to his place he wasn't there. People on the street said he'd moved out of town months ago. The number he gave me didn't connect. His house looked empty. When I returned the following week, the house had a new smell to it, like someone had been cooking cinnamon and then took it out before it finished. The camera footage saved itself to the cloud and was labeled in a new folder. I opened it and watched a new clip. It was short. It began with static. Then it showed my bedroom, the moonlight slicing in through the blinds. The bed was empty. The frames froze, flickered, and for a heartbeat, I saw myself standing in the doorway, looking down at the bed. The timestamp said 3:13 a.m. The clip blurred. When it cleared, there was someone else in the bed. Not a person exactly, more like the shape of someone under the sheets, the blanket rising and falling very slowly. On the floor near the bed, there was movement, and the camera showed, briefly, the same small chair from the attic. The carved letters caught a ray of moonlight, my name. The clip ended. I went upstairs, my hands numb. The attic door waited. The chair sat the same as before. I picked it up and turned it over. Underneath, carved into the underside of the seat, were dozens of initials, dates. People had sat for decades. There were names I didn't know and a few I did. One set of initials is repeated more than the others. Next to it, in neat numbers, were dates. They were all the same month, across different years, always October. Near the back of the attic, tucked against a beam, I found a note that made my blood run cold. The paper was brittle. The handwriting was the same childlike hand as before. He wakes them. I keep them sleeping. Underneath, in a different hand, older and shakier, another line was written. He is only a name on the chair. And beneath that, someone had written, like a person desperate to be read. If you leave, he will take your picture anyway. If you stay, he will take your picture anyway. If you watch, he will still take the next week. The whispering stopped after that. It didn't scream or make a show. It simply ceased to be audible. I slept for a few hours and woke with the sun cutting the curtains in thin bars. I looked at the attic door and thought maybe the house had tired enough of me. When I checked my phone that morning, there was a new photo in my camera roll. I had taken no pictures. The photo was from 3 in the morning. It showed me, in bed, eyes closed, my mouth quiet. On the wall behind me, reflected in the window, a pale face leaned close, as if watching. The last date in that old stack of initials on the chair was tomorrow. I left that day. I changed my number. I told myself that leaving would be the end. Weeks later, I keep waking with the feeling I'm being watched. Once, when I passed a shop window, I glanced at my reflection and for a moment the glass held a shadow that didn't belong to me. It smiled. I still get postcards from no return address, a Polaroid of my bed, sometimes the timestamp is yesterday, sometimes next week. The photos are always taken from above. Sometimes I'm in them, sleeping peacefully. Sometimes the bed is empty. Once, in one of those photos, the name on the chair was different. Someone had carved a new initial. Last month, I received a Polaroid with my name on the back and a date, October 31st. There was no year. My hands froze when I read it. The paper smelled like old dust and lemon cleaner. I don't know who he is. I don't know why the house keeps people sleep. I don't sleep with the lights off anymore. I keep a camera on me at all times, in case the house decides to bite. If you ever move into a house with a rope on the attic door, or if you hear someone say your name in a voice that tastes like sugar and old wood, listen closely to what it calls you. Names are promises, and some places keep promises differently than we do. The attic door swings sometimes on a wind that I don't feel. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can hear the faint scratch of initials being carved into something I can't see. The last item in my inbox today was a new photo. I opened it, and my stomach fell. It showed someone sleeping, a photograph taken from above. The date on the back is tomorrow. I used to live in an apartment building where the evening felt like a soft blanket. Thin walls, quiet neighbors, and the kind of people who nodded in the hallway and never asked too many questions. My unit was on the second floor, number 2B. Across the hall lived an older woman, Mrs. Hale, who grew tomatoes in pots and always had peppermint tea on the stove. Downstairs were college kids who played music on their laptops and apologized when the bass rattled the dishes. It was the kind of building where you felt safe, because you saw the same faces every day. The lobby had a buzzer system, the kind where someone would press your apartment number and the intercom would ring. If you wanted to let them in, you'd press a button. Otherwise, you'd ignore it. It was normal. One night in late winter, around 11, the buzzer buzzed the way it does sometimes, sharp and urgent. I answered because that's what you do when you want to be polite. The speaker crackled, and a voice said, "Hey, is this apartment 2B?" It sounded like a man's voice, young, if I had to guess. I opened the door for friends sometimes. "Who is it?" I asked about the speaker. There was a pause. Then a voice, the same voice, said, "It's me. Open." I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. I didn't have friends who kept my keys on the weekend. I buzzed my unit from the inside and crouched by the door to look through the peephole. The hallway was empty, quiet as a mouth. No footsteps. No shadow. I pressed the intercom button again. "Who is this?" I asked. The voice on the speaker didn't answer. Instead, it repeated, exactly, the same words I had just said. "Who is this?" My name is small, but I could hear the pulse in my ears. I thought maybe someone was messing with the system, or maybe my neighbor was trying to prank me. I opened the door a crack, and the hallway looked empty. The only thing out of place was the smell, a faint, metallic smell like coins left in a drawer for too long. I closed the door and went back to my couch. The building was quiet. I turned on the TV and tried to ignore it. A week later, the buzzer buzzed again at 2:12 a.m. I answered, and the voice asked, "Is anyone home?" Not phrased like a question, more like an expectant statement. I told them yes and asked who it was. The voice repeated, word for word, "Is anyone home?" That's when it got weird. The voice started answering the intercom with sentences I had just said. If I asked what time it was, it would tell me the time, repeating my own tone back at me. If I said, "Please leave a voicemail," the voice said, "Please leave a voicemail." It became a mirror, but not for your face, for your words. I talked to the intercom in a game. I said ridiculous things, "I eat soup with my hands." The speaker said the sentence back in the same silly cadence. It was like speaking into still water. I remember laughing so hard at it that I forgot to be afraid. Then one night, as the rain rattled against my window, I answered a call and asked, "Who are you?" The voice on the other end laughed. It echoed my laugh, my exact laugh, and then it said something different. It said my name. I froze. Only people who knew me used that tone. My name on the intercom felt like a hand under my ribs. I told myself it was someone imitating me. Maybe one of the kids downstairs is using a recording app. But I put my ear to the speaker and heard a second voice under the echoing one, a whisper that wasn't mine. It said, "Open." I looked through the peephole. Nothing. Then, on the floor just outside 2B, someone had left a small white envelope. No stamp, no writing, except for one word in red ink, "Enter." I didn't open it. The envelope sat there for a full day. Finally, curiosity or stupidity, maybe both, made me pick it up. Inside was a Polaroid. In the picture, the hallway looked like any other hallway. But at the end of the hall, faint and blurred, was a figure looking toward the camera. The timestamp on the photo was 3 hours in the future. I don't keep weird things. I threw the picture in my desk drawer and tried to go about my life. But the intercom calls didn't stop. Sometimes it would repeat what I was about to say before I said it. Sometimes it would answer a question I hadn't yet asked. Once, before I could finish, "I don't want any," it said, "I don't want any," and then finished with a voice I did not recognize, "Visitors." I started keeping a notepad by the intercom. I'd write phrases and then watch the speaker repeat them. If I told it something I didn't want it to know, like a bad secret, it would echo it back to me quietly, like someone reading over my shoulder. The notepad became a list of things I thought I could control by saying them aloud. Then one night, the intercom said something that wasn't a repeat. It said, with a voice layered like old tape, "You pretend not to hear." The voice knew about the notepad. I looked through the peephole, and there was a shadow in the hallway, not a full person, just a darker place against the wall. The intercom said again, "Open." The envelope in the hall was there, opened this time. Inside was another Polaroid. This one showed the inside of my apartment. On the couch, under a blanket, someone lay sleeping. The camera was angled as if from the ceiling again. When I turned around, the couch was empty. That night I slept with the lights on and the door chained. The intercom buzzed at 2 in the morning. I answered with the chain in place and asked, "What do you want?" The speaker went dead for a moment, then a whisper returned, "I want what you want." After that, I stopped answering the intercom. I waited for it to stop calling. But the calls didn't stop. Instead, they got closer. The voice would answer questions I had only thought of. It would say my name when I hadn't spoken it. It started to imitate sounds I made days before. Once, while brushing my teeth, I heard the speaker repeat the sound I made when I rinsed. I thought of moving out. I thought of telling the landlord, but who would believe me? The kids downstairs thought I was having fun and laughed when I told them my story. Mrs. Hale knitted and told me to sleep more. The building kept being normal, and I kept hearing a copy of myself telling secrets no one should hear. 2 months in, the intercom spoke in a tone that made me sit up. It said plainly, "We like to hear things." The word felt like a cold hand. I started recording. I set a cheap voice recorder in the hall near the intercom to capture what it said when no one was there. The file saved a lot of nothing, the usual city noise, a distant dog. Then, at 3:12 a.m., there was a whisper. It sounded like mouth against glass. It said, line by line, phrases from the notebook I kept beside the intercom. Then, quieter, it said, "Now, show me." I looked at the chain on the door, and then I heard footsteps, not in the hallway, not outside, but like someone walking above us, light and careful. The building made the small noises of an old thing that is awake. My hands dug into the chain until the metal bit my fingers. I considered calling the police. The idea of explaining an intercom that answered back in your voice felt crazy. But then the intercom clicked like a throat and said, with my voice and not mine, "Please open the door. We are cold." I didn't open the door. At dawn, the hallway smelled like pennies and the faint scent of old breath. There was snow on the mat where someone had walked away. On my door, under the chain, was a small scrap of paper. On it, written in block letters, was my handwriting. It read, "If you do not open, we will come in different ways." I burned it. The building inspector came a few days later. He pulled wires and said the intercom was fine. He checked the cameras in the lobby and said nothing had been there at night. I showed him the Polaroids. He looked at them and frowned. "Street cameras can glitch," he said. "Polaroids don't have dates from the future." He didn't believe me. That night, for the first time, the intercom didn't say words I had already spoken. It sang. It hummed a lullaby I hadn't heard since I was a child. It sounded like someone standing too close, breathing into the speaker, "Sleep, sleep, sleep." The words were soft and not my voice now. I slept for an hour and woke to cold in the room, like someone had opened the windows. On my kitchen table was another Polaroid. My name was on the back, and the date was today. I turned it over. It was a photograph from above of my apartment door, the chain still on. But the photo was taken from the ceiling. There was, in the picture, something small perched above the door, a curve of white that could have been molding or could have been a face. My phone buzzed with a notification, one missed call from my own number. I listened to the voicemail and heard my own voice say, "Let me in." The voicemail was recorded on my phone, from my phone, and it came from the moment I was still in bed. I had not left my room. I moved out that week. I left in the late afternoon, stacking boxes in the hallway while neighbors watched. I carried the intercom with me because I couldn't leave it behind, like a witness. I threw it in a dumpster 3 blocks away and watched the city take it apart. It didn't stop. Weeks later, my phone started echoing things I hadn't said. People would call, and I heard my laugh on my voicemail, answering questions I never asked. Sometimes it recorded the sounds of my apartment when I was away. Once, on a call with my sister, she told me I sounded sleepy. I played the recording back later and heard myself in my own voice, whispering into a microphone, "Open." I tried to explain to friends how the building sounded like someone taking a pen and copying my notes. They smiled and said maybe someone was listening. Maybe we all talk into empty rooms more than we think. Maybe I should learn to speak differently. The last time I heard it clearly, not an echo, but an answer. I had been alone in a motel off the highway. A storm wrapped the place in a small feeling. My phone buzzed, and it was a text from an unknown number. The message said one word. Door. Below it, a Polaroid was attached. It showed a hallway I knew. My old hallway. A small white thing was perched above the doorway, more visible than ever. It looked like a child leaning over. It looked like the top of a head and two hollow eyes. I haven't found the source. I don't know if it's technology or something that listens in the seams of our lives and copies us like an echo that learns to speak. All I know is that sometimes when I say something aloud now, my phone answers back with a voice that's almost mine and then adds a line I didn't say. If you live in a building with an intercom, be careful what you say to it. Names repeated in your voice are not always you. A call from your own number is not always you. And if you hear a lullaby you thought you forgot, don't listen to it too long. The last message I got from that unknown number was a Polaroid of an uploaded noise file, and a caption, "We like the sound of you. Won't you sing for us?" When my sister and I moved into the cabin by the river, it felt like being in the middle of nowhere on purpose. The city had been loud, and we wanted quiet. The cabin was old but cozy, one main room, a small loft, a wood stove that made the walls smell of pine. On the first night, the river sounded like a steady drum. I slept like I hadn't in years. The second week in, we started noticing small things. Our utensils moved, towels left on chairs folded differently, the dog would stare at a corner and growl. We blamed the dog or the wind. The cabin had settled, wood moves and ticks. It was the kind of place that makes small things feel bigger than they are. Then, at night, we began to hear a voice through the floor. It was faint, like someone whispering under a heavy duvet. Not words at first, just a sound that splashed up through the floorboards like water. We would laugh and call each other names, "Did you hear that?" And then the voice would answer with a pause, like a gull. One night, while I was making coffee, I heard it clearly. The voice was soft and slow, saying, "Under." I stopped mid-pour. The mug rattled in my hand. I thought of mice. Then I thought of pipes. Nothing fit. We dug into the floor in the back room where the sound seemed strongest. The wood there was older, a little bowed. We pried up a plank. The hollow beneath smelled thick, like damp soil and old letters. There, in the dark, we could hear breathing. It was weirdly human breathing. Not an animal. Not wind. Like someone sitting with their face in their hands. I lowered a flashlight and saw nothing but joists and dirt. Then I saw the outline of something wrapped in cloth, like a bundle. The cloth was bound in twine. When I reached in, my fingers touched fiber and then a small cold hand. We pulled it out, and the bundle unfolded like peeling plastic. Inside was a child's shoe, brown and cracked. A toy soldier. A scrap of paper. On the paper, in block letter, someone had written, "She sleeps under the floor. We talked to make sure she stays." We put the items on the table and sat in silence. My sister swore the voice came from under the floor and not the walls. The next day, we nailed the plank back in place and told ourselves we had found an old child's stash, nothing more. But at night, the voice kept saying two words. "Check under." We started hearing names. Not ours, names we didn't know. They were soft and small. At first, it sounded like a story being told from one person to another, but then the voice would say a name, and a small laugh would answer back. The laughter sounded like marbles rolling in a tin. In the morning, we'd find small things moved around, a spoon in the bedroom, a sock on the windowsill. I began to dream of a girl in a blue dress who couldn't speak. In the dream, she pounded on the underside of the floor and pressed her forehead to the boards. I woke up shaking and convinced that if I went downstairs, I'd find her, small and pale, looking up with empty eyes. One morning, I pulled up a board near the stove. The hole had been widened. The bundle we had pulled out was gone. In its place, someone had left a new scrap of paper with a single line. She likes the quiet. She doesn't like the light. We left for the day, and when we returned, the yard smelled of smoke, though we hadn't left anything burning. The stove was cold, but the hearth had ash scattered like it had been used recently. On the mantel sat a small child's figurine, one I had never seen before. It looked like it had been placed there with care. That night, the voice under the floor spoke clearly, "Come down." Not whispering now, but patient, like someone asking politely for company. We argued about whether to call someone. There was no one nearby to call. The nearest town was 20 minutes away. The dog whined and refused to go near the back room. It was like every animal had decided something was wrong. I crawled to the back room with a flashlight and pulled up another plank. The opening was bigger, and the smell was worse, like old breath. I shone the light down and saw something I didn't expect, a small alcove carved into the dirt, lined with old photographs. They were black and white and showed a family. In each picture, there was a little girl in a white dress, always at the edge of the frame. In one of the photos, the girl stood in front of a house that looked like our cabin, but older. Beneath the pictures, someone had carved letters into the earth, "Never wake." My sister came in and sat at the edge of the hole, hugging her knees. She said, "We need to cover it up." I wanted to, but my fingers trembled. The voice whispered, "Don't wake her." It sounded sweet and tired. I thought about the handwriting we had found before and the child's shoe. At that point, things escalated. The voice started saying people's names from the town, people who had died decades ago. Old names I recognized from the graveyard on the hill. We found, tucked under a plank, a newspaper clipping that told a story about a child who had drowned in the river near the cabin 50 years ago. The child's name was Annabelle. The photograph printed with the article showed a smiling girl in a white dress. The voice under the floor would say, "Anna," and then somewhere under the house, the twine would tighten like fingers around something. One night, I heard the voice sing. It was a lullaby, slow and not quite right. The tune spiraled down into the boards. My sister woke me up and said, she wants someone to sing back. I felt sick, but I found myself singing the lullaby along with it, because the sound hurt to ignore. The dog whined and lay down, and covered its face with its paws. We tried to leave. The car wouldn't start twice. The third time we tried, a neighbor came over and told us to stay, saying, "Some things are better left sleeping." He didn't elaborate. He drove away, and as we watched, a light came on in the distance, as if someone else had decided to watch the place too. That night, the voice asked my name. It had a child's curiosity. "I told you." It answered by saying a different name back to me, a name that was small, fictional sounding, like a name from a nursery rhyme. It said the name like it was reciting, and then it laughed, and the laugh crackled like old records. I can't describe the last night because parts of it blur like wet ink. We heard scratching under the floor like fingernails. The dog wouldn't stop barking. Twice during the night, the dog ran to the back room and pushed its head under the plank, whimpering as if it could smell something. We pried it up, and the dog licked the dirt like it had found an old bone. In the pile of dirt beside it, something moved. We left in the morning. I don't know how we managed. We drove away with the dog shaking and the radio on, so the quiet couldn't get into the car. On the day we left, I looked at the back of the cabin. A neighbor stood in his yard and waved. He didn't say hi. He just raised his hand and held it like he was asking for something. The air over the river looked thin, like glass. A week later, my sister called. She said in a voice like someone trying to move a heavy thing, "I dreamed of Anna again." Then she said, there was a picture on the mantel. Anna's dress was clean. She breathed and added, but she was blinking. I haven't been back. I send photos to my sister, and she sends them back with arrows pointing at places. Once, in a photo I sent of the back room, I noticed, in the corner, a small shape pressed against the beam. At first, I thought it was a knot in the wood. Then I saw eyes. 2 black oval eyes are looking through the crack. The last text she sent was a picture taken from above of our old living room. The date on the phone said the picture was taken last night. The couch was empty. On the floor, in the center of the room, a small child's shoe sat facing the front door. It looked like it had been left there for someone to take. Below the photo, my sister wrote one line. She likes the quiet. She likes it better when people leave. We tried to tell ourselves the voice wasn't real. Maybe it was the way the wind moved through the joists. Maybe it was the neighbor playing tricks. Maybe it was all of us, projections of a strange place. But sometimes, late at night, when I sleep in my apartment in the city and the bus goes by and the windows hum, I hear the faintest echo of a lullaby. It comes from nowhere, like a seam in the air, and it says, softly, "Don't wake her." I don't know what is under that floor. I don't know whether someone hit a body, or if the past folded itself into the wood and never left. I only know that the cabin keeps voices under the floor, and that they can reach up if you lift the plank. If you ever find a child's shoe under an old floorboard, put it back. If you hear a lullaby that makes your teeth ache, cover your ears. Some places like their secrets to sleep, and when we pry them open, they beg us for more. The last message I got from my sister is a picture of a small white dress hung over the mantel. There is no one in the photo. The dress is clean. That concludes tonight's video of 3 bedtime horror stories. Each of these stories came from real people who swore they experienced them. And whether you believe them or not, they'll make you think twice about the noises you hear when you're alone at night. So I'll ask you this. Which story scared you the most? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories every week. Until next time. Stay safe. Or at least, try to.